G'day legends, I hope that you're doing really well. Now, you're going to have to excuse my voice as it has gotten a little bit worse, but next week I do see a specialist and hopefully we can get it sorted out. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to have a look at the maps, talk about some news and go from there. But something I've been thinking about a lot recently, and I posted in the Telegram, a quick plug there if you want to come and join, but is that history is written by the victor. And with even this conflict, there's so much misinformation, so much speculation going around that it's really difficult to know exactly what is happening. And it depends on who you get your news from, where you get it from, what you believe can paint a completely different picture. That even in the age of everyone has a smartphone, thousands, tens of thousands of drones, mainly the internet, everything, it's still impossible to know exactly what is happening and peer through some of the propaganda that is going on. And this makes me think about, what were we fed from other wars? What is true, what is not, in an age where we had a newspaper or state-funded media, and in wars of which the victors absolutely wrote the history. There wasn't smartphones, there wasn't the internet to put out any separate information. So I've thought about that a lot. Now, of course, I'm not saying that history is all rubbish and to be thrown out, but it's one of those things that I think of. If there's even so much misinformation and believing misinformation in this war, what is the most public war to ever happen? What would have it been like back then, where there is just the paper and that's it? So it's interesting. I guess what in history came to be truth, but wasn't, if that makes any sense. There's also a degree of what I would call truth bullying, where something that's happened over the last couple of years is people want to belong to a group identity mainly, and first and foremost, they put themselves in that group, and you can't sway any way out of that group, whether it is a gender identity politics, whether it is the left or right wing, whether it's Russia or Ukraine, all of these super politically motivated groups, you can't deter anything from that, or you will get, in some cases, bullied to death from other people. And it goes beyond online trolls. There's people doxing, there's real world implications of things like this. And I think where there are people who are believing things, and this is across all these arguments, and there are people who are saying things, doing things of which they don't actually really believe, but because that group says that it's true, therefore they have to go along with it or they'll be pushed out of that group. And I think this is something we see here. I had a friend of mine say, I agree with everything that you say, but because you criticise anything west of Russia, I could never publicly support you. And I thought that was a very interesting view. So let's talk about some things that have happened that are going on the front line and where we go. Now, what I really want to start this with is what Zelensky posted today on his Twitter. Ukraine will never agree to any option of a frozen conflict, any. On the contrary, Ukraine will help other nations of the world striving for a true, just peace with our peace formula. Now, we know that Ukraine want all of their pre-14 border, post-91 border back, and there it is. And that a frozen conflict for Ukraine would be absolutely terrible. That a frozen conflict means no entry to NATO, probably not even the EU either, and that frozen conflict takes them back to where they were in 2014. And eventually with the frozen conflict, the support would start to dry up. So I think that is interesting. But on the front line for the last, and I would say this year, probably the whole year, we have seen basically a frozen conflict, realistically. Like, we saw Bakhmut was the biggest real moves. Well, the biggest move was Wagner, bloody Moscow, and Rostov. But as far as in Ukraine, it was really that. So the front line has been fairly frozen, and I have speculated before that lengthening this war could be a tactic from Russia to lead into the elections, to lead into people getting fed up with it, things like this. That lengthening the war, I believe, can benefit both Ukraine and Russia, but I think it more benefits Russia, although Russia could, end up crumbling. And we'll talk about that more with what we've seen in the politics of Russia, especially with Prigozhin's Wagner and the March for Justice exposed some cracks in this. Now, the Ukrainian Defense Ministry Alexei Reznikov, in an interview with The Times, has said that the liberation of a group of villages in recent weeks was just a preview of a much bigger push to come and is not the main event of this military campaign. When it happens, you will all see it. Everyone will see everything. Meanwhile, Deputy Defence Minister Hanna Maliar has spoken on advances on Bakhmut's flanks, but the troops have not yet entered Bakhmut itself, saying the liberation of this direction has its own particularity that complicates the process. Now let's have a look at some of the MOD updates. Ukrainian airborne forces have made small advances east of the village of Krasnohivka near Donetsk city, which sits on the old line of control. We're going to talk about this. This is one of the first instances since Russia's February 22 invasion that Ukrainian forces have highly likely recaptured an area of territory occupied by Russia since 14. Recent multiple concurrent Ukrainian assaults throughout the Donbass have likely overstretched Donetsk People's Republic and Chechen forces operating in this area. Now, before we look at the next one, let's talk about that region. So, of course, we're going to jump into the maps here with Ukraine, the centre, the capital of Kyiv. Red areas occupied since 22, and importantly for this, the purple areas occupied since 14. Of course, the green areas which have been liberated by the Ukrainian forces. You have Romania, Poland, Belarus, and Russia around here. Now, where we're coming is down into the Donetsk Oblast here. And we've talked about Mariinka a lot, so this is what we're looking at, is this little blue bit here. Now, I missed this the other day when I was talking about it, but I did put in the top comment of, hey, I missed something critical. Now, this is what it is talking about, that this, it says, is one of the first instances since Russia's invasion. From what I have seen, and I've studied this pretty closely, this is the first instance we have seen where Ukraine have come up against the 14 strong points and have pushed into this. And I could be incorrect on that. So let's have a look. If we turn on this brings up then the defensive positions, and as we see, there are no defensive positions in and around this region, but we do know that yes, these positions being shown, these are the new defensive works. We know that all down here was trench systems, was dug in since 14, so I think this is a big deal that we saw back on the 22nd to the 23rd. We did see Ukraine take this ground, and this was ground that has been held by the Russians or the Donetsk People's Republic since 14. Now, this is a big deal because we have seen Ukraine clear a lot of this red territory, but where the real fight is going to be in this is clearing the purple territories. Remember that the red areas, they've only been built up for, well, I shouldn't say only, but they've been built up since February 24th, 22, where these purple regions, in some cases, have been built up since 2014, especially Donetsk, Luhansk, and Crimea. These are the regions that were, or the annexation of Crimea in 2014. Not only that, but there is a strong partisan in here that will be both for Ukraine and against Ukraine. There are partisans on both areas. The red areas is majority pro-Ukrainian, but we still do see partisan actions against Ukraine, like in the Kramatorsk bombing that happened yesterday, that I won't speak on too much. There's enough speculation about that out there, but that the SBU have said that they've arrested someone that helped target that area. So we see a lot of partisan movements, but this is important because Ukraine is going to have to clear these purple, heavy, strong points that have been there for a long time. But like the MOD is saying, it could have stretched these forces. We know the Chechens are in Mariinka, but we saw Chechens pull out and move around and all of this. So I thought that is very interesting. So let's have a look at the MOD. From, well, the most recent one, the 29th, hasn't come out. I'm a little bit forward in the world. In Australia, forward in time, not much else. But early on the morning of the 22nd of June, Ukrainian armed forces struck the Chonar road between the Crimean Peninsula and Russian-occupied Kherson Oblast. Now, we spoke about this the other day. I'll show you where it is. These bridges service one of the two main road supply routes between Crimea and Kherson. The route over the Chonar Bridge are the most direct route from Russia's Crimea logistics hub to Thankyou and the Zap sector, where Russia is currently defending against major Ukrainian offensive. The temporary closure of the route caused vital Russian logistics convoys to take at least 50% longer to reach the front via alternative routes. Reports indicate that Russian authorities almost certainly constructed a pontoon bridge replacement crossing within 24 hours of the attack. It is highly likely that the crossings are limited to military traffic only. The speed of which an alternative crossing was constructed indicates how vital this route is to the Russian military efforts in occupied Ukraine. Now, I'm not sure why the MOD is talking about something a week old, but let's have a look at where this is. So, we have Crimea down here, and then we have the Chonar Bridge here, and this is what was targeted, they say, by Storm Shadow missiles, and put basically a hole in the road. It didn't take down the bridge. Now, there are two bridges here, but it's not shown that well on the deep state or shown at all, but that a pontoon bridge was set up, and as we see, and this is both good and bad for the Russians in this region, is the bad is the supply routes to the north coming out of Crimea are through here and through here. But the good is if Ukraine do make it down through these offensive regions, they're going to have to attack on one of two routes. They're going to have to come through here. Now, of course, we will see at some point the Kerch Bridge get targeted by storm shadows and probably taken down. That's what I believe, that is going to have to come down when Ukraine do assault in and around this region. That is just going to have to happen. But that bridge is important, but we have seen that they've set up then these pontoon bridges and that supply has resumed, but only to military traffic through there. But I don't know how much civilian traffic would really be allowed through these regions anyway. We know the civilian traffic anywhere in the front line, whether it is Russia or Ukraine, is greatly reduced due to the threat of all sorts of bloody things. So, my voice is failing me. So with that said, let's have a look over the maps at some other regions and see what is going on. Now, we do know that there are a lot of pushes in and around this Oleshki region, but these maps are not showing any actual ground changes in here, but we do know that it is being reported that Ukraine have pushed over and have taken some area in and around where this Dnipro River is. Of course, this area was flooded, and we don't know the full extent of how this has affected Russia's build-up of areas here. Of course, this was the Novikhovka Dam through here that was taken down. So, let's have a look here. This is where we are seeing a lot of the pushes are in the southern region, a lot of the successes as well. So let's roll back a couple of days, and we haven't really seen any changes in and around here. We know this Lobkovy region and then to the south of Orokhiv. So then let's go onto the ISW map and look and see what is changed there over the past couple of days. So we have, of course, the red triangles is the defensive works of Russia, and we can see where Ukraine is about to run into these defensive works with the pushes on the front line. Now, what is this showing differently to the last few days? So, this is the same region here, but this was from about a week ago. Let's have a look, and I don't think this is showing much differently at all. We've talked about this little spire here has come out, but not much differently. Let's have a look in and around this region. Now, the only thing showing differently between this older map on the right and this one will be this little bit down here, but we have spoken in the last little bit that this has been taken through as well. We haven't seen much of a change in and around here. We have spoken about that Ukraine did have advances in Marfapil as well. So let's come up into here. This is where we're seeing, I believe, the majority of the movements around here is this Makarivka or Rozhany type area. And we're going to have a look between these maps and as well as the deep state and see what is happening here. So let's roll back to yesterday, the day before. So this is where we saw that big push come and take Rivnopol. And that was a big thing of the Rivnopol falling. Now, what we spoke about yesterday was that the Rybar Russian sources showed more of a push into Rivnopol rather than this whole northern sector here then falling off for the Russians. But interestingly, the Rybar Russian sources map today shows this. It shows very similar here. So it shows that this has all come off. Now, let's have a look at where this goes from here. So we do know that Russian sources are saying that then Ukrainian forces are pushing into Peretuny here, but from what they said yesterday was they're coming from Lavadny as well, but this isn't showing it there today. So it is saying that they are in line or to the south of Staromyorsky in here. So let's have a look. So what they are basically saying on the Rybar Russian source is they have pushed that the Rivnopol is in grey zone. So here we have Rivnopol, but they've pushed down here in line or even to the south maybe of Staromoylsky as well, and Uruzani. Now let's zoom in. So you have Uruzani, Staromoylsky. So basically this across here. So they're saying that it's cutting down into here somewhere. And this is what I find funny, is that a lot of the Ukrainian maps are not showing as much movement as the Rybar Russian sources here. And let's have a look and see what this is showing. So here we have Staromoylsky, Rivnopol, and this is showing the same as the deep state, not as much as it is showing then on the Rybar Russian sources. Now, of course, here we have Robotyny as well, and this is down near the Orokhiv. So let's go back to here, and this isn't showing too much difference in a push to the south, but where it is showing different on the deep state compared to the Rybar Russian sources, the Rybar shows less on this western edge than the deep state here shows. But as we see, this is a very heavily defended, if not the most heavily defended line through the south here. But could Ukraine outmaneuver warfare these trenches? This is the good and bad thing with defensive positions, is they're great if someone comes you head on, but if they can outmaneuver them, then your equipment, your soldiers become basically useless there, because it is static. It's not that dynamic, although we do know some elements of this will be in quick reaction to then come out and have a dynamic picture. Now, what the Deputy Defence Minister was talking about was Bakhmut and the capturing of the flanks. So let's have a look from the 26th, 7th, 8th, and then 9th. We do see just some slight movement on these flanks. We do see the push more up into Berkivka, and what we did see, and we spoke about the other day, was this push down into this region, as well as cutting off this push up this road. People were concerned that this road would become a way into Slovyansk and Kramatorsk as well, but we know that there are heavy pushes on the flanks of Bakhmut, but the forces have not yet entered the actual centre of Bakhmut. That is still under control of the Russian forces. So let's have a look at this compared to the last few days. So, of course, we talked about this the other day, that this region down along this reservoir where the water runs is coming under the control of the Ukrainian forces, and are, slowly taking these flanks around here, and could one day surround Bakhmut as well. We know that this area was somewhere that was fought for incredibly hard. Now, of course, these waterways, the dam we're talking about, this has been geolocated from here. So you see these Ukrainian forces that have taken this region here, and this was geolocated where they're putting up the flag right on where these reservoirs run, and that is right at this green dot. So we zoom out a little bit, and this is the region we're talking about of fighting through these regions. But we see Bakhmut, that there's still a major defensive line to the east of Bakhmut as well. So definitely a very hot place, but somewhere we need to keep our eye on as well and talk about this. So Rybar Russian sources, what is it showing? Now, it's not going to show us as south as that, but it does show these Ukrainian pushes heading into the east and coming right up onto the borderline of Bakhmut, although it does not show the same push into Berkivka. So it is saying that they're basically in line with the reservoir down here, which is very similar, and then just onto the foothold of Kromove around where this reservoir is here. So it's saying onto the north side of this, pushing up. So where I would say is more across in this region. That's what the Rybar is showing compared to this. But the deep state is showing a lot more ground in and around to the south of Ivanovsky. And what the Rybar is showing with this darker blue is that this is regions that Ukraine has cleared. So we have Ivanovsky here, and this is the region here that it's saying that Ukraine did clear a large majority of this. So here we have this road where we see it come and bend around. This is this road here, just to the north of that. This region here, this is where they're saying a lot was cleared. So I believe these maps are showing fairly similar, but it is very interesting to see that even Rybar is saying there's a lot of pushes in and around this region, so it's coming back and forward. So many are saying that this mutiny we saw from Wagner Group really taking place over the majority of the last week is the beginnings of the cracks forming in the Russian leadership, although it only took actual place over 18 to 24 hours, where the ongoing flow of these effects could be huge. So the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz has said, I do believe he is weakened, referring to Putin, as this shows that the autocratic power structures have cracks in them, and he is not as firmly in the saddle as he always asserts. So what we know happened was that Wagner basically came down into Rostov, as well as made it all the way about 200 kilometers just short of Moscow. Now, Wagner has been moved in large to Belarus. Prigozhin, must be nice, took his bloody private jet across into Belarus. We know that there were billions of dollars exchanged in funding Wagner in Ukraine from Russia as well. So what is actually happening here, because we know Lukashenko has given Wagner an abandoned base to have, then that's where Wagner sit. Could this open up a new axis of front line? We have seen that Belarus has been used before for staging, and of course Belarus is a very close ally or a controlled state, people would say, of Russia, that they're definitely on the Russian side. So we saw in the beginning of the war, of course, it came down through to Kiev, came down through Belarus. Could we see that axis open up again? Could we see a try on Kiev, or could we see a try and cut off Lviv? Because, of course, the main supplies of these weapons is coming through the west of Ukraine, through here. So could we see a push, attempt down here somewhere? I'm not really sure, and that is just all conspiracy at the moment. Maybe it was just a failed mutiny that has just pushed off and banished into Belarus. Now, the Polish President Duda, has said it is difficult for us to exclude today that the presence of Wagner Group in Belarus could pose a potential threat to Poland, which shares a border with Belarus, a threat to Lithuania, as well as potentially to Latvia. And we're going to speak a lot more on this. Now, he says here, a threat to Lithuania and Latvia. Now, we do know there is a weak point in NATO. Of course, the only road network to get into Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania is through Poland here. And here we have Kaliningrad, which is part of Russia, that sit in here. And here we have the Suwalki corridor between Belarus and Kaliningrad, being Russia and Russia, and that could potentially cut off these three states of NATO, and this is very interesting. This is definitely time for us to put on our tinfoil hats, but I was sent this here, this article written in Greece, saying, will Russia unblock Kaliningrad? NATO studying a Wagner lightning strike on the Suwalki corridor, which is where we are talking about. There is great concern in NATO's southeast wing and the Baltic countries about the deployment of thousands of Wagner elite soldiers to Belarus. For the first time, Poland and Lithuanians are talking about a nightmare scenario that could blow up the Baltic, two countries that fear Wagner's mission to Belarus may not be related to Ukraine, but to the Suwalki corridor connects Belarus to the Russian enclave of Kaliningrad that has been blockaded by the Lithuanians for a year under the pretext of EU sanctions. We know that has been then cut off. Now, into this as well, we have the Sydney Morning Herald saying that Germany offers permanently stationed troops in Lithuania to strengthen NATO's eastern flank, up to 4,000 troops in permanent bases on that flank. Now, we're not saying that this is exactly what Wagner is going to do, because in my personal belief, if Wagner tried to come through here, they would get absolutely whacked by NATO forces, and as well, because they're private military contractors, they're not part of the Russian Ministry or the Belarusian Ministry of Defense, they're not officially soldiers. They are military contractors, so they could be targeted as terrorists without invoking any of these other articles bringing NATO into the fold. So I can't see this being anything other than a suicide mission through here, unless I'm missing something then politically. This article says NATO fears this corridor could be relatively easily blocked by Wagner's elite forces, with the consequence that Lithuania would lose land corridor and be completely cut off from the rest of Europe, along with Latvia and Estonia, what we have talked about. And Wagner's forces have found ready-made armaments in Belarus, dozens of tanks, armoured vehicles, and aircraft, Iskander missiles. This is the armament the Russians had left at Christmas during their aid mission to Belarus. The Russians left, the armament remained. We know that Russia stationed a lot of guys in Belarus and had brought in a lot of equipment here as well. And you agreement for military training. We know that Belarus hasn't got that much military experience, but it relies on Russia, and it's going to have Wagner as well train some of their forces here, as well giving some of their abandoned bases to Wagner, but also rely on their training. And we know that Russia is doing this as well. Zelensky said today that some Wagner troops still remain on Ukrainian territory, and they, from what I have read, from what I have studied, are in a training establishment role for the Russian forces. A lot of the Wagner group is made up of ex-Spetsnaz guys with a lot of experience and are training the Russian force on the ground. Belarusian sources are reporting that in this region the construction of Wagner PMC camps is starting. The camp is designed for 8,000 people, will be 24,000 square kilometres and at a distance of only 200 kilometres from the border of Ukraine, as well as Polish forces are being deployed along the border, and we know that Germans are as well. So from the Polish Deputy Prime Minister, due to the presence of Wagner forces in Belarus, Poland will increase its forces permanently present on the border, and additionally fortifications and additional defences will be built. So this is a map here of the Suwalki corridor that's approximately 60 miles, being about 100 kilometres long through here. And could this be breached and gapped by the Wagner forces? Now, of course, I don't believe that Wagner has anywhere near the power to actually take on this corridor and cut off these Baltic states from the rest of the from the rest of Europe and NATO. But that said, we never truly know what Prigozhin, Putin and Lukashenko are actually up to. But I think this is unlikely, but it is a very interesting scenario that people brought forward. Don't truly know what the response to this would actually be. Now, there's claims the commander of the Russian Aerospace Forces, Surovikin, and his deputy have been detained due to knowing the plans of Wagner Group's mutiny on the weekend, but not then disclosing that to the rest of the rank, and potentially helping Surovikin, who has previously led the invasion force in Ukraine, has not been seen in public since Saturday. But just not seeing a senior member in public doesn't mean that they've been killed. Look at Zaluzny and Budanov as an example here. The Russian Defense Ministry has yet to comment on the alleged arrest of Surovikin, but Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov on Wednesday dismissed the report as speculation and gossip. Now, Surovikin, who was called a legendary figure by Prigozhin, could be definitely at the pointy end of this military brass reshuffle that personally I think is what Wagner and Prigozhin were aiming for in their march of justice. They wanted a reshuffle of those top powers, the Gerasimov, Shogu, things like this. They wanted that reshuffled, and if they could reshuffle and actually sort some of their shit out, it would definitely affect how the front line is going from there. Legends, I think I've cooked my voice, but I hope this wasn't too indifferent. But I really appreciate your time. If you'd like to support me, there's links down below. But thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Bye bye.